Okay, good evening, everybody. Can you all hear? Hands up if you can't. Fine. Okay, thanks very much. We've got plenty of mics, but if I don't need to use it, I probably won't. My name's Sally Wainwright. I'm chairing the evening on behalf of Radical Scotland. I'm very pleased to welcome tonight Joanna Cherry from the SNP. No waving. Richard Doherty from the Green Party and Ricky Henderson from the Labour Party, and some of you will know any or some or all of them already. If I can just say also there are apologies from Dan Farthing, who's the Liberal Democrat candidate. He's involved tonight in, I think there's been a big report on the contaminated blood issue, and he's very involved in that, so he was sorry he couldn't be here. However, we did, in advance of tonight, invite all the candidates to complete a survey, and their responses are on the piece of paper that we've put on your chairs, and there are responses from Dan Farthing there as well, so although he's not here, you do have some indication of his views. The format tonight is that I'm going to invite each of the candidates to speak for about 5 minutes, just introduce themselves in any way they see fit, and then throw it open to questions from the floor. Noel from Democracy TV is recording it. We were hoping to live stream it, and to that would also allow questions from the online viewers to be included. However, there's problems with the connections at the moment, so that might not happen. It might only be recorded, but it will be on the Democracy TV site at some point tomorrow. There. If you want to go and watch it all again, or watch yourselves, or whatever. Without further ado, I'm going to start on my right and move to the left. Being not here. If I could start with Joanna Cherry. Thank you.
Thanks very much,
Do you want the
Sally.
mic, Joanna?
My position at the table certainly doesn't indicate the position of my politics vis-à-vis the other candidates. It's just I grabbed the first seat. Thanks very much for inviting me tonight, Sally. I've got a huge admiration for the work that the Radical Independence campaign did during the referendum, and long may their work continue. My name's Joanna Cherry, and I'm the SNP candidate for this constituency. I am not a career politician. This is the first time I've stood for elected office. I've come into politics as a result of the independence referendum. During the referendum, I co-founded and led a group called Lawyers for Yes, and I was also very involved in the doorstep and street campaign. What I want to do in this election is to take forward the progressive politics of the Yes movement, and above all, what I want to do at Westminster is to make a difference. For too long, Scotland has been sending 50-odd Labour MPs to Westminster who have really made no difference at all. Although I'm new to representative politics, I'm not new to representing people. For the last 20 years, I've been in legal practice as an advocate, and for the last 6 years as a QC. But I don't do the corporate work or the commercial work. I represent ordinary people in disputes with big organisations such as insurance companies or their employers. I also worked for a time as a specialist sex crimes prosecutor. I've also done a lot of pro bono work and worked with Women's Aid and Rape Crisis. So I think I've got the skills and experience to be a good MP for this constituency. And if you want a strong, progressive voice at Westminster, then I'm your candidate. So why vote for my party? Why vote SNP? More SNP seats at Westminster mean more influence and power for the people of Scotland and the people of this constituency. It's as simple as that. We are offering a real alternative to the drab Tory-Labour cuts consensus. We oppose the austerity agenda. Our First Minister has set out an economic policy which would reverse that agenda and promote growth, equality and jobs for all. We would invest in childcare and public services, and we wouldn't waste £100 billion on renewing Trident. We'd also make sure that the NHS is always cared for, its budget protected, and its future secure in public hands. And we're going to keep the Westminster parties to the promises they made in the last dying days of the referendum campaign. Ricky on the left over there, the Labour candidate, will tell you that Labour will be different from the Tories. But you should judge Labour not by their words, but by their actions. Throughout the referendum, they were joined at the hip to the Tories, and since then they've rather kept in that habit, voting with the Tories on 30 billion more cuts, voting to renew Trident, and voting to oppose the moratorium on fracking at Westminster. I've got a lot of respect for the Scottish Green Party, and I fought beside them side by side during the referendum. But only the SNP are strong enough in this constituency to beat Labour and the Tories. Remember this when you go to vote. 6 times since 1970, Scotland has voted Labour and got a Tory government. It's time for change, and only the SNP can be that change. My campaign team were out canvassing in Westerhailes last night, and support for the SNP is high here. I think people in this area and all over Scotland are moving to the SNP because they know that left to their own devices, Labour would simply follow the Tory austerity agenda at Westminster, as they did when they voted and trooped through the lobbies with the Tories, voting for 30 billion of cuts in January. However, despite the good response on the streets and the opinion polls, my party is not complacent, and I am not complacent. It's good ideas and hard work that win elections, not opinion polls. So from my point of view, the next few weeks are going to be about hard graft, humility, and a daily determination to earn the trust of the people of Scotland and the trust of the voters in this seat. Those will be the hallmarks of the SNP campaign. The SNP are taking nothing for granted, and we're going to work very hard to persuade you that you should vote for me and my colleagues on the 7th of May. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Richard Doherty from the Green Party.
Thank you. Yesterday I gave a talk to a high school class about green priorities, and it was quite hard to believe the difference in engagement with politics of the youth now compared to when I was their age at the turn of the century. But the difference is that all that they know and all that they stand to inherit is permanent austerity and never-ending war. In the time since the modern Scottish Parliament began, at least if you're close enough to Edinburgh, engagement now also brings an expectation of direct involvement and an expectation of change. And this culminated in the incredible debates that we saw around independence. But instead of continuing the momentum of the referendum, where communities and important new voices were finally heard, we risk going straight back into negative anti-politics. The focus again is on tribal divisions and tactical voting, and we might be losing sight of the many issues and the hope that inspired a record turnout in September. As your Green MP, I would offer genuine anti-austerity politics. Our party opposes cuts to public services stemming from spending decisions at all levels of government. I want an end to corporate welfare, bailouts and bonus culture, with the wealthy paying their share in tax for the common good. As well as protecting funding for existing public services, I would promote the view that meaningful and sustainable investment in world-leading public services is key to building a fairer society. I'm positive about immigration because we have an obligation to challenge divisive rhetoric, bigotry and racism at all times. While investing in work and training opportunities for all ages, a welcoming attitude offers us the chance to address any skills shortages, generate tax revenue to support vital services and widen access for the underrepresented in society. And we also need to give people a proper pay rise with secure, satisfying employment. Sadly, the SNP and Labour are both opposing Green proposals for £10 minimum wage. But in addition to that, being serious about tackling poverty means investing in the sustainable community-owned industries that are our future, with a just transition away from oil and gas industries that offer no future. TTIP, Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership, the trade deal being negotiated in secret between the USA and Europe with the UK as member state, will give companies the power to control wide-ranging government policy. The Greens' policy of renationalising the railways is one of the most popular policies around, but TTIP would make it impossible to achieve for any government because privatisation would be irreversible no matter who you elect. TTIP's a corporate power grab, and I believe that the only appropriate position is full, unambiguous opposition from your MPs at Westminster, and that's only on offer from the Greens here. It's true also when it comes to fracking. Finally this year we got a moratorium after the SNP and Labour both faced both ways on the issue since 2012 when Green MSP Alison Johnson first called for a ban. But fracking still has not been banned. And at Westminster and Holyrood, Greens will resist the giant corporate push for a dirty and unneeded dash for gas. Greens say no to Trident and no to membership of the NATO nuclear club also. People pigeonhole the Greens as idealists, but we've seen with issues like the bedroom tax, with fracking, TTIP and devolution of power from the parliaments down to the streets, Greens offer a practical and consistent stance, putting people ahead of profit and communities at the centre of decision making. The Greens offer genuine anti-austerity politics. I'm hopeful for what we can achieve, and I would like you to vote for me in Edinburgh South West. Thanks.
And last but not least, Ricky Henderson from the Labour Party.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Sally, and thanks to the Radical Scotland Group for organising tonight's event and inviting me along. In the next 5 minutes or so, I want to just to describe a little bit about myself, what some of the challenges are that I think the next government needs to face up to, and what I believe are the radical proposals being put forward as part of the Labour manifesto to tackle those issues. First of all, myself, I've lived, worked and raised my family in the southwest of Edinburgh for the last 35 years. I'm a trade unionist and former anti-apartheid activist. I'm a City of Edinburgh councillor, have been for 16 years. I used to represent the Parkhead ward, which was further along City Hill there, from 1999 to 2007. And I now represent the Pentland Hills ward, more towards the southwest of the constituency, from 2007 until now. So I know this area well, I know the communities well, and I've worked with countless organisations and groups in the time I've been on the council. And it's my privilege to have represented large parts of Westerhailes over the 16 years I've been a councillor, and to have worked with the numerous organisations that make up part of the Westerhailes community infrastructure. In fact, as well as working with them, I co-founded a group about 10, 12 years ago called WAGARA, which is the West Edinburgh Group Against Racial Attack and Harassment, where we work with public agencies in the area, along with members of the black and minority ethnic communities, to tackle racism and to discuss and give a platform for discussion on the agency's policies and how they deal with racist incidents, and how we support the victims of those events, and that's a group that continues to this day. But having worked with numerous organisations and people, constituents coming to my surgeries, etc., I've come to the conclusion that I don't think people have been well served by the governments of Westminster or Holyrood in recent years. Edinburgh is a relatively prosperous city, as we know, but it's a city of huge contrasts. From Balerno to Broomhouse and Craiglockhart to Clovenston, we see real evidence of a decline in living standards and increases in poverty and inequality. 22% of children in Edinburgh South West live in poverty. 11,000 households in Edinburgh South West live in poverty. Over 30% of the households in Dumbryden and Clovenston live in poverty and are on a par with the poorest areas of Glasgow and Dundee. 19% of all workers in Edinburgh get paid less than the living wage. The difference in male life expectancy between the most and least deprived areas in Edinburgh is 20 years. When you put that in perspective here, that means coming out of the Wet, turning right and walking up the road, up the Westerhailes Road. And you go from Clovenston and walk up over the Gillespie Crossroads into Collington, it's about a 200-yard walk. There's a difference of 20 years in terms of male life expectancy between those two communities. And I'm sad to say that 100,000 more Scots are now living in poverty today than they were a year ago. Now, no one would be happy with these statistics. I wouldn't expect them to be, but how do we tackle them? Well, I believe Labour I believe Labour does have a progressive and radical agenda for this election, which tackles some of the issues that I've highlighted. A 10p starting rate for income tax that will benefit 24 million people. Restore the 50p tax rate to those who are earning more than £150,000 a year. A mansion tax on houses that are worth more than £2 million, and that would fund the recruitment of 1,000 more nurses here in Scotland. Scrap the bedroom tax. Freeze energy bills and reform the energy market. Tackle corporate tax avoidance and close loopholes and clamp down on those that are tax dodgers and don't pay their way. Put an end to exploitative 0 hours contracts for workers. Increase the minimum wage to £8 an hour. Labour would deliver a jobs guarantee for our young people, guaranteeing a job, training place or an apprenticeship for every young person leaving school, and go further, creating a futures fund from a tax on bankers' bonuses that those young people who go into the world of work can bid into a fund for up to £1,600 so they can support their way in the world of work by buying tools or taking a lease on a shop or whatever it is that their chosen career would be. And we give local authorities more powers to create jobs locally. We'd introduce a triple lock against fracking and give the final say on whether fracking goes ahead to local communities themselves. We'd introduce fairer terms for tenants in the private rented sector and build 100,000 new homes in Scotland. We'd also double the statutory rate for paternity leave that currently exists. I believe that is a radical and progressive agenda, and if Labour does make up the next government, I believe that would be good for the people of Westerhailes, good for the people of South West Edinburgh, and good for everyone in the UK. What we know is that when working people are doing well, Scotland does well and our society does well, and I think this agenda would deliver that. Thank you very much.
I'm going to throw it home to questions. I just thought I'd say we'll aim to finish between 1/4 and the latest 8:30. Ricky pointed out that that would allow everybody away to at least watch the second half of the Scotland match, and thank you all very much for turning out on such a night. And actually I was really pleased to discover that this was at least one area on which all three of our candidates could agree. They were all going, yes, 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 we'll form an alliance around that one. So we will aim to finish by then, at the latest. So having said that, are there any questions? Gentleman at the back. There's a mic coming round, so if you could just wait for that to arrive.
Hello, it's for the Labour candidate. What you just said is a wonderful wish list, but for 30 years your party could have put all of that into place, and you haven't. So I think it's now time for somebody else.
Was that a question? Well, thank you for that. Well, I would put to you that I think the agenda that's right today for the problems that we're facing today in the country are the right solutions and the right solutions for the country. You say that Labour have had 30 years to do these things. What one might think back to 1997 when the Labour government was elected, and you'll remember the introduction of the national minimum wage. Now that hadn't existed. That hadn't existed prior to 1997, and many people at the time opposed it, saying that it would cost jobs, that it wouldn't work. But Labour pressed ahead, and it is now in place. It is working. Even the Tories now support it, and the Tories have introduced an increase because they know that it works. So I would challenge you in saying that things haven't been done in the past. And that same government, when it was introduced, when it got elected, the same government said they were going to introduce a windfall tax on the privatised utilities that the Tories have privatised in the decades before. Again, the sceptics said it would cost jobs, it wouldn't work. Well, Labour went ahead and introduced that windfall tax. It produced tens and tens of millions of pounds, and it got young people into work, and at that time virtually eradicated youth unemployment. Between the years of 1999 and 2007, Scottish Labour managed to take 2/3 or to reduce the number of children in poverty by 2/3. I think that's a good record. We introduced things like the tax credits for working people, tax credits for pensioners, the winter fuel allowance. the free bus pass for everybody aged over 60, which is still extremely popular to this day. So there's a whole list. I'll probably come back to you with more as the evening goes on, sir, but I think Labour's record when it has been in government is a good one, and we've always managed to make strides forward. And I think it's the time is right for us to do that again.
Okay, yes. Would either of you like to comment as well?
Yeah, I'd like to comment. Ricky did mention a wish list of ideal things, but I said to you in my introductory comment, don't judge Labour by their words, what they promise you in this campaign, judge them by their actions. So let's just look at a couple of the things he mentioned. The 10p tax rate, which they're going to reintroduce. It was Gordon Brown who got rid of that towards the end of the last Labour government. 0 hours contracts. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I used to be in the Labour Party, and I take quite a close interest in what Labour get up to. I can tell you that in 1995, at the Brighton Labour conference, Tony Blair promised that Labour would abolish 0 hour contracts. 13 years of Labour government followed, and they did not abolish 0 hours contracts. Fracking. I noticed that Ricky is completely opposed to fracking in the answer to the survey. Well, that's very interesting, but that is not Labour Party policy. And as I told you at the start of my speech, when the SNP and others, including the Greens, were trying to push through a moratorium on fracking licensing in the UK Parliament, Labour abstained or voted against it. So they didn't support a moratorium in the UK Parliament. Let's look a bit closer to home. Free school meals for children aged 1 to 3. All the experts say that that is absolutely crucial in tackling child poverty. Yet Ricky's colleagues in the Scottish Parliament voted against free meals for primaries 1 to 3 in Scotland last year. I'm sure Ricky's a thoroughly decent individual. There's many of them in the Labour Party. But look at what Labour have done. Look at their record. Judge them by their record, not by what he's promising you.
So just
I'll come to you in a minute.
Briefly on that, the one thing I would say is if the minimum wage is working so well, I don't know why we've spent today asking the Scottish Government about why apprentices are earning less than half the minimum wage. I don't know why people are opposing our proposals to get £10 minimum wage and actual living wage. And on fracking, I don't think that it's credible for the SNP or Labour to take a position on fracking that tries to outdo the other anymore, because people are very, very well aware of the fact that the Greens were the only ones with a principled, unambiguous position. We were consistent at every level. We said we oppose it, where the SNP and Labour in Holyrood, Westminster and council levels, they flip-flop depending on what suited them at the time. Yeah, I can't remember what the other bit after that was.
Right, we'll come back to it. There'll be plenty of opportunity. This gentleman, was it? Yeah, it was you, was it, that was asking?
Yeah, I'd just like to ask the SNP.
Can you just wait for the mic for a second? I'm sorry. It's for the recording, really. It's not so much that you can't be heard.
Thank you. I would just like to ask the SNP candidate if she didn't think these, which she emphasised over and over again, these 50 Labour MPs achieved nothing. These 58 Labour MPs, to put you in the picture, introduced the minimum wage throughout the whole of the Great Britain. They also introduced care for the elderly, which had never been done. They also introduced free travel. Now, I know a lot of people here might have big cars, but there's a lot of people not got big cars. And lastly, free travel, yes, and TV licences for over 75. All they were introduced by a Labour government with these 50 MPs support.
I'll come back on that. My point is this. There have been many times in the past when the Scots have voted Labour and the English have voted Tory, and we've ended up with a Tory government. And in that situation, the 50-odd Labour MPs that we've sent down to Westminster have been able to do next to nothing to protect Scotland from Tory cuts. I'll give you a classic example for those of you in the room who are over the age of 30. The poll tax. Now, I was in the Labour Party when the poll tax was brought in. I was a Labour Party activist. I ripped up my membership card over Labour's pathetic inability to protect the working class people of Scotland from the poll tax. And I think many people have followed that route. That's my point, sir. I'm not saying that Labour hasn't done some good things in the past. I would be defying history if I said that. My point is, in this election, if you want a strong voice for Scotland, and if you want a voice anti-austerity, then only an SNP vote will achieve that. Your party's policies, your party's shadow chancellor stood up on the telly the other day and said there was nothing in the Tory budget that he would reverse. Are those the words of a socialist? Nothing in a Tory budget that would be reversed by Labour's incoming shadow chancellor. That is the reality of the modern Labour Party. And sir, if the minimum wage is so important, and if raising the minimum wage is so important, why did Ricky's Labour colleagues oppose the devolution of the minimum wage to Holyrood in the Smith Commission? We know we've got a left of centre consensus in Scottish politics. If we got the minimum wage devolved to Holyrood, then we could put it up for people in Scotland at least, and England might follow our good example. So if the minimum wage is so important to Labour, why did Labour prevent its devolution to Holyrood, thereby preventing any chance of getting it up in Scotland in the foreseeable future?
I'm going to see if Ricky would like to come back. And then you can come in and begin, if you want to.
Yeah, go on then. I mean, at the risk of, I don't want this to be a punch and jury show myself and Joanna, but you know, when the challenge is set out, I'm going to have to respond to something. I mean, Joanna mentioned the poll tax, and yeah, a load of us that are over 30 will remember the poll tax. But perhaps Joanna forgot that Margaret Thatcher, who introduced the poll tax, only managed to get to power on the back of a vote of no confidence in Westminster that was backed by the SNP.
What about the
34?
34 Labour MPs
so it's unfortunate.
That's the Cummings resolution.
Could we maybe concentrate on
1979 when they brought in the Labour government?
Could we maybe concentrate on the future and the present and not the dim and distant past?
I can quote from Jim Callaghan and Dennis Healy. 1979.
I'm sorry.
1979. I was there. Callaghan, in his memoirs, quotes clearly it was the 34 Labour MPs, including Dennis Skinner, the SNP. Of course they voted. Of course the SNP voted them down. They didn't give Scotland the.
Okay, could we just come back to the question? I can give Ricky a couple more seconds to finish answering this. And then maybe we can concentrate on the here and now rather than the past, because I think the point has been well made on all sides. Ricky, have you got anything else?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So yeah, I think it's unfortunate that we ended up with 18 years of Thatcherism on the back of the SNP supporting that vote of no confidence. I think it's also I think it's also unfortunate that the SNP chose.
Dennis Skinner.
It's unfortunate that the SNP in their wisdom.
Could you just let people speak, please?
Chose to support.
Could you let people speak, please? Right. I don't want speeches from the floor tonight, and I don't want heckling from the floor. Okay. So you can ask a question if you've got a question, but in the meantime, please allow people to speak with some respect.
Yeah, the SNP's record goes further in terms of backing the Tories. During the years 2001 to 2010, 70% of the occasions where the members went through the lobbies, the Tories voted, the SNP voted to support the Conservative. When it came to finance bills, it was actually 88%. So it's sometimes difficult to take lectures from the SNP about what Labour do in and out of power when their record isn't particularly, doesn't bear a great deal of scrutiny. And while on the subject of the living wage, I mean, we've introduced the living wage in Edinburgh as part of the council. It hasn't been easy. There's a cost involved, clearly, but it's the right thing to do, and that's what we've done it, and we've found the funding for it. It's becoming harder for us to do so in terms of contractual relationships with external providers, but I've had some success in that within the health and social care field. But again, it was disappointing that the MSPs at Holyrood, the SNP government, weren't able to support the living wage through the procurement legislation. That would have allowed us to guarantee the payment of the living wage through procurement of services with external bodies, and unfortunately the SNP government chose not to support that, or to support the petition by Unite on blacklisting of union members. So you know, I'm trying not to get into a Punch and Judy show with Joanna on this, but I think if we do want to point out some home truths, then I'm afraid we need to get it from both sides.
I just have a very, very quick point. I didn't really tune into most of that because, again, it was coming back to the SNP.
Speak up a wee bit.
Sorry, okay. I was just saying most of that I didn't feel was particularly relevant to me because I'm not in the SNP or Labour. And I don't know why the Liberal Democrats and the Tories in particular, and Labour of course, want to constantly talk about voting SNP, because I would actually rather talk about voting Green. And on both sides, it's all talk about influence from the number of block Scottish votes that we're going to get, but 59 Scottish MPs, even if they're all the same party, is not a significant block in Westminster. We're still going to be completely outnumbered. What matters is having a plurality of voices to represent a range of issues and to elect the people that you actually trust to represent you, not some faceless party with a bunch of suits.
Yes, question here, please.
Hello.
Hi, I'd just like to maybe simplify things a bit. I just want to get Ricky Henderson's opinion on, there seems to be a bit of a mistrust with the Labour Party, personally. I've seen it all over Scotland, especially after the referendum. I just want to get your opinion on something. I was given this through my door a couple of days ago, and basically it says that Labour are taking credit for the abolition of tuition fees in Scotland, which was introduced in 2008 under an SNP government in Holyrood. So I just want to get some clarification. Maybe you could help me as well with this one. What is the Labour Party stance? Because I know that Jim Murphy has spoken out categorically against the abolition of tuition fees. Very recently, actually, he changed his mind on it. So I just want to get the Labour candidate's opinion on that. Thanks.
Sure. Jim Murphy's made it perfectly clear that there will be no tuition fees introduced in Scotland under Labour, either at Westminster or at Holyrood. Hope that reassures you.
In 2008 by the SNP government, what's the response to that?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Labour are taking credit for the SNP.
Labour seem to be taking credit for the SNP abolishing tuition fees in 2008.
There was no tuition fees in 2008. There was none. There was none, never been any in Scotland.
Well, that was something that was implemented under SNP government in 2008, was it not?
There's never been tuition fees in Scotland. Never.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get clarification on.
Okay, Joanna.
I'm genuinely asking.
No, I understand your point, sir, and I think what I can make very clear to you, as our former leader Alex Salmond said, quoting Robert Burns, the rocks will melt with the sun before the SNP allow tuition fees in Scotland. So that's a pretty strong commitment. We've no intention of ever allowing them. I totally understand your confusion about Labour, because Jim Murphy's categorical guarantee seems like something of a road to Damascus conversion, because Jim Murphy in the past has voted for tuition fees in England, as did many Scottish Labour MPs to force through tuition fees in the British Parliament. So I completely understand your confusion. I don't want this to be a Punch and Judy show either, but there's a big fight going on for votes in Scotland at the moment. And with all due respect to my colleagues in the Green Party, the fight is between Labour and the SNP. And it's an issue of trust. Who do you trust? Who do you trust to oppose austerity? Who do you trust to put the people of Scotland's interests first? SNP or Labour? And what I'm saying to you is, don't judge Labour by the words, by what they'll promise you in the campaign trail, by the lies they'll put through your door. Judge them by their actions. I'll give you a classic example of a lie from the Labour Party. During the independence referendum, you were repeatedly assured by the Labour Party and their Tory chums in Better Together that, and I quote, a vote for no will protect the NHS. You were repeatedly told during the independence referendum that the NHS in Scotland was completely separate and there was absolutely no threat to the NHS from anything that would happen at Westminster. Now that Labour are looking for your vote in a British election, they have changed their tune. Ed Miliband came to Edinburgh at the beginning of this month, and he told you, the people whose trust he's trying to gain, that the NHS is under threat and that privatisation in England can affect the NHS in Scotland. That's what my party were saying throughout the whole referendum, that That's what Labour told you was a lie in the referendum. But now that they want your vote, they've admitted it's true. And they don't even have the decency to apologise for the lies that they told during the referendum. So I come back to my mantra. Don't look at what they're telling you now. Look at their actions. Look at what they've done in the past. Look at what they did during the referendum. The guy who's the MP for this seat at the moment, Alistair Darling, Labour MP, received a standing ovation at a Tory party conference. I think that tells you all you need to know about the Labour Party in Scotland.
So the issue that kicked this off was trust and tuition fees. So I think it's quite important that we point out that tuition fees do exist in Scotland. So if you're a postgraduate or a foreign student, then you are, or a mature student, you are going to be paying fees. And we shouldn't be treating these students as any different or any less worthy than any other Scot. As well as the post-study work visa issue, we need to recognise the value that students provide themselves to our communities. We need a better and a more sustainable way of funding education, but ideas like the Greens policy, or the Greens idea of citizens' income, where you grant everybody a universal payment, allowing carers that are voluntary to not have to work extra hours to make ends meet and wear their fingers to the bone to look after their family and provide this service to the community. But it would also allow people to pursue education or to pursue any opportunities that are denied to them because of wealth at the moment. These are the issues that if you want to trust a politician, then maybe they should start talking about.
Do you want to come back down?
Yeah, I mean, and this is a genuine attempt at clarification. Joanna says that the Ed Miliband or the Labour Party told lies about the NHS and about the impact on the relative relationship between Scotland and England. I think what Ed Miliband was probably referring to was that any attempts to break up or privatise the NHS in England, as has partially been achieved, would then be reflected in the block grant settlement that comes to Scotland and the Barnett formula consequentials of that. So, in a way, we have a vested interest in ensuring that the NHS in England remains protected and that further investment goes in so that we don't suffer any consequential reductions in Scotland. I think that was the genuine attempt at clarification.
That was the argument made by the Yes campaign that you denied, your party denied it throughout the whole referendum. It's not often I'm astonished by gall,
That's untrue, to be honest.
but really it's sheer gall.
That's untrue. That is untrue.
It's true. It's absolutely true.
The point that is making is not true. The point that is made.
If this gentleman's going to say something, could you give him the mic, please? Thanks. We have the mic just here. Thank you very much. And then I'm going to move on after this contribution.
Well, I just want to make this point and then ask the question. The point that was made during the referendum, I don't want to relive the referendum because it's over, was that if Scotland was to become independent, and the same applies to full fiscal autonomy, is Scotland would have to deal with its deficit alone, and that would have a massive impact on public services. That was the point that was made, and that's truer than ever today because of the collapse in the oil price. Okay?
I'd like to come back on that because it's very important. You accused me of lying. Okay, I thought you'd finished your point, sir. You finished your point. We have a chairperson. Let's let her handle the situation. The chairperson. I don't think you're chairing, sir. She is.
You finish your question. Ask a question. And I'll let all the candidates come back.
So,
thank you.
Like everyone else, I don't want this to be a ding-dong. I think it would be good to actually have a proper discussion about the policies people are putting forward. I think the Greens and the Labour candidate put forward some policies, and it's pretty clear the SNP doesn't like the Labour policies, but we've not really heard what SNP are actually opposing, things like the living wage, etc.
So what's your question, sir?
So I work in education. Thanks for the prompt. I work in education, and if we are serious about reducing inequality in Scotland, it's not about increasing benefits, which I think, there's an argument for that as well. It's not about the living wage or the minimum wage. It's about investing in education. We've seen that the council tax freeze in Scotland has robbed communities like this one of about £2.5 billion right across the country. That's brought cuts to schools, and that's affected educational inequality. I work in a university, Heriot University, just a mile or so away from here. The grant for the poorest students from areas like Westerhailes, is now the worst in Western Europe because it's been halved by the SNP government. If you go to Edinburgh College, the grants.
Can we have a question, please?
The grants there have been cut. The grants there have been cut, and the places have been cut. So my question to the SNP candidate is: what does she propose to reduce education and try to get more people from poor backgrounds in Scotland to colleges and university? If we've got the worst grant in Western Europe, what is the proposal from the SNP on that?
Very happy to answer that. Thank you, Sally. Very happy to answer that. Experts tell us that if you want to improve education, you need to get people young, and it needs to start right from the early years of children. I'm going to answer your question.
Could you let the answer? Let the candidates answer, please.
To be bullied into not saying what my answer to this question is. The SNP. Well, unlike the leader of the Labour Party, I like to have notes to prompt myself so I don't leave out important points.
Could we just move on?
So,
no. Before you answer the question, could you tell me exactly where that figure of 2.5 billion comes from? I need that in verse and I need numbers.
No.
The 2.5 billion pounds is actually from unison, and that's actually...
Could you, there is a place for debate, and there are many opportunities for debate. Tonight is an opportunity for you to ask questions, to hear what the candidates have to say. You might not like their answers. I dare say that you won't like 2/3 of the answers you hear on average, possibly more. Nevertheless, I would ask you to allow the candidates, if they're asked a question, to answer it. Okay? So I'd like to go back to Joanna Cherry and let her answer it. I think it's a very interesting question about how to get more young people into education, and I will put that question to all three of the candidates in a minute. But we'll start with Joanna.
Thanks, Sally. My reply is start them young. The SNP has prioritised free nursery education. As some of you may be aware, under the SNP, free nursery education has increased from 12 to 16 hours a week. And in the future, by 2020, we hope to get that up to 30 hours a week. I've already mentioned the introduction of free school meals for primary 1 to 3, and I've mentioned that leading experts on poverty say that's one way to lift children out of poverty. Children can't concentrate if their stomachs are empty, so that's a very important part of our policy. We've spent £100 million trying to drive forward attainment levels in primary schools. We've built 526 new schools in Scotland. We've got 111 more new schools in the pipeline. We've got an education maintenance allowance to help less well-off youngsters. These are some of the things that we've done. But you've got to realise that the SNP government at Holyrood works within a fixed budget, and that's a budget that's given to us by Westminster. As you will know, my party, along with Richard's, fought for a yes vote because we wanted Scotland to be completely in charge of our own budget so she could prioritise, for example, education over spending £100 billion on the Trident renewal, which of course is Labour Party policy. We didn't win that referendum, and we're not trying to refight it in this election, but we're going into this election on a policy of seeking Devo Max for Scotland. That's getting everything devolved apart from defence and foreign affairs. Labour in the Smith Commission were the meanest party in relation to devolution. Even the Tories wanted more things devolved to Scotland than Labour did in the Smith Commission. If we really want to make a difference in social policy in Scotland, a really big difference in areas such as education, which costs a lot of money, then we have to get the real power to do that at Holyrood. And that is what my party stands for. And that is my answer to your question, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. Richard. Richard, would you like to talk about how the Greens would encourage more young people into education, and specifically if you have a policy on universities?
Universities and colleges, that's correct. I don't think the SNP candidate heard that part.
I think The confusing part of what you said at the beginning was that it's not about benefits and it's not about paying people the living wage. Okay. Because it's all those things. Yeah, investing in the schools and investing in the teachers in particular, instead of everybody being overstretched and working too hard. I mean, you hear the stories of the people that are new into the teaching profession. My mum was a teacher, my dad was a teacher, my aunt was a teacher, my granddad was a teacher, my grandmother was a headmistress, my aunt's a teacher. And the one bit of advice that every single one of them gave to me was never go into teaching. But yeah, it's both. So a lot of the work that my mum does as well is in special needs schools, and the funding for them is being shut. They're losing staff, they're losing facilities, so then that has the impact on the mainstream schools. I hate the council tax free. I think the council tax free is a terrible thing. That's what I meant earlier about opposing austerity at all levels of government. The SNP don't. Yeah, exactly. I agree. But yeah, so you need to invest in it all. You need to invest in the people, and you need to invest in the infrastructure. That's the only way you get people at the stage of being able to go to university. You've got to, as Joanna said, get them when they're young. You have to make sure that everybody from the early stages of life has all the opportunities that we can give them. That's the only way to really fix it.
Thank you very much.
No, I'm fine. I won't use microphone unless people would prefer that I do. In terms of that's an impressive role of family members that Richard's got in the teaching profession. And this, I haven't repeated this very often, certainly not on camera, but my mother's a teacher as well. She's a retired teacher, and she taught Alex Salmond at school. She did. Honestly, she genuinely did. So taught me economics, I think. But anyway, that's a true story. I'm aware of the figures. The free tuition fees is good. We want to encourage young people to go to college and university. It does feel, though, sometimes in Scotland that at the cost of the free tuition fees, the college sector seems to have suffered a reduction. So there are a few hours now taught in colleges and fewer places available. And I think fewer youngsters from poorer backgrounds are making their way through higher and further education, and that's sad. That's a reversal of trends over many years. Joanna made the point that the Scottish Government has to work within a fixed budget. Well, it does up to a point, but they also have powers that they haven't used. They can increase or decrease income tax by I think it's 1 to 3 pence in the pound, and have chosen not to do so. Now that's fine. That's a democratic decision. If they decide that that's not the way they want to go, then fair enough. But what I'm saying is that there is the ability there to change the budget of the Scottish Government should it wish to do so. And coming on to the council tax freeze, and I'll make hopefully a less partisan point in a moment, but for a second, the Edinburgh Council tried to get support from the Scottish Government to introduce a visitor levy, a tourist tax, if you like, for people coming to Edinburgh because we're a tourist destination, and the Council does have to spend a lot of resources in order to support the infrastructure that supports the tourist industry. So it seems right that tourism should produce a little bit of income that could help us to cope with that and take the strain off other budgets. And the SNP government, I'm afraid, has rejected that call outright. I don't know why. Many people in Edinburgh seem to think it's a bit of a no-brainer. Many politicians across all the parties seem to think it's a good thing to do. It happens in many other cities and many other countries around the world, but we've been prevented from developing in that, and I think that would have been a very helpful source of income for us as a council. On the wider point, though, about the council tax freeze, I think it's now we've reached the point where the council tax freeze has lost credibility, and I do welcome the fact that the Scottish Government have commissioned now a review into local government finance. I hope that will be done relatively quickly. But I do think we do need a debate in Scotland. We need a very public debate in Scotland about what sort of local services we want in our communities and how are we going to pay for them. What are we prepared to pay? Is that through property tax? Is it through income tax? Is it through some other form of raising revenue? And I do think, once this election is out of the way, we'll be facing up to Holyrood elections and then local government elections after that. But really, the time has come for Scotland to have that public and open debate about what sort of public services we want and how we're prepared to pay for them in the future. Because the current system is not sustainable.
Joanna, you wanted to come back briefly?
Come back briefly and have a quick outbreak of agreement with Ricky on the point about exploring alternatives to the council tax. The Scottish Government have set up a commission to explore alternatives to the council tax with Marco Biaggi, the relevant minister, and with COSLA. And that's ongoing at the moment, and it's a project I welcome. Just a little point of information. Ricky's mentioned Edinburgh City Council a couple of times and how Edinburgh City Council worked on introducing the living wage. Not a lot of people know this, but Edinburgh City Council is run by a coalition of the Labour Party and the SNP. So it can work sometimes. Sometimes the Labour Party and the SNP can work together.
Thank you. Yes.
Just very quickly, since people are talking about the council tax, I should probably point out that we actually have proposals for what to do instead of the council tax, which is to replace it with land value tax. And Andy Whiteman's been working on that for years and years and years, and now this actually seems to be breaking through. And it is thanks to Andy mainly that we are getting the Scottish Government to listen a little bit, and hopefully we'll get something towards a fairer settlement and a better way of funding our vital public services soon.
I'm very conscious that quite a lot of the questions that we've had in the last wee while have been about specifically Scottish policy, and I just want to remind people we're talking here about the Westminster election, and therefore actually if any of these three candidates is elected to represent us, actually I'm also, I live in this constituency as well, us at Westminster, some of the issues that we've been discussing are not really going to be discussed so much at Westminster. So I'd particularly like to invite questions that are reserved about issues that are reserved to Westminster, just so that we make sure that they don't get lost in the local questioning. So is this a Westminster-based question?
Yeah,
please feel free. Yes, there's a microphone right next to you. I'll come to the other people in a minute. I saw there were several hands up. Yes, okay.
We've had a number of statements that the largest party in Westminster gets to form the government. And yet, the Cabinet Manual, for example, which is the Bible for governance in the UK, says nothing of the sort. I can quote you chapter and verse.
We'll take your word for it.
Yeah, I can quote you chapter and verse. And I think I've had, for example, a Labour Party pamphlet through the door stating that the largest party gets to form the government. Now, I agree if the party has an overall majority, more MPs than all the rest put together, that would be true. But nothing in my experience has shown me that it's true otherwise, without some sort of balance and not a party could ally with one or another. It seems to revolve around the party that can win a vote of confidence that actually gets to form the government.
And is there a question at the end of that?
The question is really for comments on that.
Okay.
I suppose it's directed largely to the Labour Party guy, but you know, perhaps other people wish to chip in. I mean, it is crucial to how we affect Westminster.
Fine, thank you very much. Well, since it was asked you to start off with Ricky.
Thanks. I mean, about your superior knowledge of the Cabinet Manual, I'm sure it's a cracking read. And I take your point about the rules may not prevent a smaller party going into coalition with a whole bunch of other smaller parties in order to make up a majority. That's how the arithmetic of it, I suppose, could work. But I think we all understand, and I'm pretty sure history will tell us that that's not the way it works out. It's the larger parties that then go on to form a government. And I'm sure we would all expect that when we wake up on the 8th of May, there will either be a Labour government or a Conservative government. And if I was a betting man, and I am, I would say that it's going to be the largest party out of those two that will have the ability to go forward and form a government. And it may well be that the Conservatives will have the opportunity to form another government with their friends in the Liberal Democrats. That's a distinct possibility. And I suppose what we're highlighting is that if you believe that the progressive agenda that I've laid out tonight and that those commitments are the right thing for the country and for this area in South West Edinburgh, and the only way to get those things is to vote Labour and deliver a Labour government so that we don't have the nonsense of having to worry on the support of smaller and fringe parties and perhaps some people that you would rather not work with.
Thank you very much. Richard, do you want to go? Yes. Come to you.
I find that a slightly strange conversation to have, particularly on the day when I think Jim Murphy said today that if the Tories are the biggest party, Labour won't seek to form a government. So you can lose by 1 seat and Labour will just go, all right, that's fine, we'll have a Tory government then. I somehow don't think that's genuine. I also think it totally misunderstands democracy, and it's got to the point now where none of the messages that come out about winning this election or who to vote for are in any way even credible, let alone worth listening to. I think vote for what you believe in. And then we'll see what happens. If Labour want to form a government with somebody, if Labour can form a government with somebody, then I'm sure they'll be looking for it. But yeah, vote for what you believe in and stop listening to the nonsense.
Totally agree with Richard. You should vote for what you believe in, but it's not true to say that provided the magic figure of 326, which is what you need to have an outright majority in the Westminster, it's simply not true to say that if you don't reach that, only the largest party can form a government. We've got a very good example in history. I know Labour Party don't always like to be reminded about Ramsay MacDonald, but Ramsay MacDonald was not the leader of the biggest party, and he formed a coalition government back in the midst of time. One thing I can guarantee you on behalf of the SNP is that we would never support any kind of a Tory government. You'd never get us supporting a minority Tory government. And that's something that you haven't heard from Labour yet. There have been some talks of a grand coalition. Are Labour going to give us their absolute guarantee that they would never support the Tories to prevent my party from having influence? Well, it'd be interesting to hear that. But my point is this. People should vote for the principles and the policies that they believe in. And then we'll see what happens. But so far as my party is concerned, you know that we'd be prepared to vote to work with Labour on a case-by-case basis, but that we would never work with the Tories. And that's a guarantee that's very clear.
A Westminster question, was it, at the back? Yes.
Hello, it's a question which has UK impact. There's been a lot of talk about this Atlantic trade agreement that's being drawn up, and that in fact the real danger to the NHS is because Tory and Labour, as far as I'm aware, have not stood up to remove the NHS from that agreement, and it effectively means that those agreements can be put out to private tender. In fact, private companies have an absolute right to bid for them and governments can't stop it. Is any of the parties prepared to agree that that shouldn't be allowed to happen to the NHS? It should be removed from that agreement.
Yeah, well, it's SNP policy to argue that public services and the NHS should be protected from the TTIP agreement. The problem with this TTIP agreement is that it is being negotiated in secret. The negotiations are not transparent. Furthermore, because we are not an independent country, we in Scotland do not have a seat at the top table in Europe, and we can't have a direct influence on TTIP. However, we can elect members of Parliament who will go to Westminster and will argue that public services, and in particular the NHS, will be protected from TTIP. And you have my absolute guarantee that that is the position of the Scottish National Party.
So TTIP is a very complicated issue. I've written a couple of articles about it, and the first thing that people wanted me to write about was about the NHS and exempting that from TTIP. And the problem with that is, and I had to try and gently explain it to the editor, was that it's not actually possible. You can't leave the NHS out, because as soon as you privatise a bit of the NHS, it's no longer the NHS, and as soon as you privatise something under TTIP, you cannot go back. So it's meaningless to talk about exempting things from TTIP. The secrecy and the lack of public information is very, very, very serious. That's why there's a lot of protests, that's why there's leaks, that's why the Green MEPs in Europe are the ones that we're having to rely on to try and get us information, because it's so blocked out from the public hearing anything. But it's not the NHS in terms of the be-all and end-all. The People's NHS campaign has been fantastic. It's raised a lot of awareness, but it is beyond that. It's every public service, it's every regulation, it's everything. You cannot put up wages with TTIP because that dents corporate profits, so you'll get sued. You can't have any regulation that's stricter than anywhere else, any other country that's signed up to TTIP. So, for instance, in Australia, under a similar agreement, Philip Morris, the tobacco company, are suing the Australian government for introducing plain cigarette packaging. This is still going through the courts, but in New Zealand, they're not bringing in plain packaging until they see the outcome of this. So even though the New Zealand government is not being sued, their public health initiatives are being dictated by a corporation in America. That's not right. That's not just about the NHS. That's about everything. And it's disingenuous to say we can exempt this and we can exempt that. No, we can't. We have to fully reject TTIP. And the SNP's position that they cannot take a position of opposition until they've seen the final agreement isn't good enough. That's too late.
Thanks. I mean, I'm going to agree with both Joanna and Richard. Although Richard does seem to be very well informed, and I'm pleased to see that. I tried to do a bit of research on TTIP, and actually it's very difficult to find reliable information, particularly online, on TTIP. That might be something to do with this cloak of secrecy that the negotiations are taking place. I share the concerns that have been expressed. My understanding is that we are opposed, that the Labour Party is opposed to TTIP and its implications. And not just the NHS. Well, that's my understanding, that's what I've picked up. But I think it's worth going back and checking, because I share the concern that not just the NHS, but I think any public services would be subject to some sort of compulsory private intervention to say that they're going to start running our public services against the wishes of local people. Would just be outrageous as far as I'm concerned. So I am certainly 110% opposed to the introduction of TTIP, and I'll certainly go away and just double check that with the party, because I think what Richard has described would be completely unacceptable in the UK or Scotland.
Thank you. Joanna? I just want to come back on one point. I disagree with Richard that it's not feasible to say that public services and the NHS could be exempted from TTIP. The reason I disagree with that is because that is what other member states of the EU are arguing, that public services and the NHS could be exempted. So it is a feasible position, and it's the position which the SNP is taking at present. Now, I see people shaking their heads, but I wonder if these people know something that I don't know, because the negotiations have not as yet been completed. The agreement has not been completed. And there are other EU states who have similar concerns to the concerns expressed by my party. Now, my party has not said it's going to rubber stamp anything. My party has expressed a particular concern about public services in the NHS. And the First Minister has also expressed concerns about what Richard alluded to, secretive tribunals being set up to adjudicate on disputes between corporate entities and the state. Now, as a lawyer, I feel particularly strongly about that legality should take place in open court, subject to procedural norms and human rights norms. And our First Minister has supported that position as well. So please don't leave this room under the impression that the SNP are going to lie down before TTIP, because that is most certainly not our position.
Can I just make a quick point?
Yeah, a quick one.
The important thing about TTIP is that the SNP were very quiet on this, and in fact Sam Henderson backed it. Nicola Sturgeon changed their mind as a result of a petition which was waged against them. Angela Constance, she said recently, the Scottish Government recognises that there could be many positives to TTIP, particularly for economic growth and for the jobs that arise from it. So you've got a government here, just like with fracking, they're trying to both stay outside of the media and also keep voters in the dark. Treading a very fine line here.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being absolutely honest with us.
I am being honest. I am being honest, sir.
So why
I've told you what our policy is. I've told you what our policy is. Could you direct your comments through the chair, perhaps, please?
Why did they take a petition?
Well, I think the point is that Joanna's telling us now what she says her policy, her party's policy is, and whether or not it's changed. Do we have another question on? Excuse me. Oh, okay, it's somebody else's turn. So you've had plenty to say tonight. Do we have another question from about Westminster?
Can I just ask Joanna Cherry how she can stand back and say she might, in some circumstances, support agreement which has been negotiated in secret for the last 3 years, and we know threatens public services. We know that it written into it, unless it's it's written into it in a draft, that it's going to allow unaccountable courts to decide whether we in the UK are allowed to pass regulations to ban fracking, even to raise the minimum wage. That we could be sued for that by companies in America. How can you possibly?
Absolutely incredible.
Okay, thank you, sir.
You might, in some circumstances, approve it.
Well, as I've said, I'm very well aware of the concerns about investor-state dispute resolution tribunals. That's my area, that's the law, and I believe in transparent legal decision-making. So you've got my position on that. What I'm telling you about the position on TTIP is SNP party policy that was voted on in the conference that took place last November. And we're having another conference this Saturday, and there'll be another motion up about TTIP.
Could you please stop heckling? I've asked other people not to, and you've had a lot to say. Now, could you please let people speak without interrupting?
Thanks, Sally. The debate about TTIP will be shown on BBC television unless anything goes wrong with the feed, and you're very welcome to watch it. I am not going to agree to... my party will not have a position on an agreement that they haven't seen. They will need to see the agreement and they will need to go through it. My party, as you know, sir, wishes to have a voice at the top table in Europe. All the EU member states will have influence on whether or not what is finally written down in the agreement is accepted or not, because that's the nature of the European Union. I would like Scotland to have a seat at that top table. As a result of the no vote, we won't have it. And I'm pretty sure, even though independence may be coming soon, we won't have it before TTIP's been finalised.
Can I ask you about your position as a Westminster MP?
Indeed, my position as a Westminster MP is as follows. I oppose the inclusion of public services in the NHS in TTIP because I don't want backdoor privatisation. I oppose investor-state dispute settlement tribunals because they are not fair, they are not transparent. Corporate entities shouldn't be able to determine policy. That should be a function of the democratic electorate. That's my position on TTIP. Now, I can hear you that your position, sir, is that you'd like outright opposition now. That is not the position of my party. Well, it's not the position of my party. My party is very democratic. We took a vote on our position at conference, and I've told you what it is. Can I suggest that you apply the same scrutiny to my party's policies, to the Labour Party's policies? Because I think you will find that Labour are not opposing TTIP either. Yes, I know, and I'm giving you a very full and honest answer. And I know it's not the answer you want to hear, but I'm in the business of telling the truth about my party's policies, not misleading you about them. So you hear our position on TTIP, and I suggest that maybe you won't like it, and maybe you'd like to take a harder line. But don't assume that the Labour Party's position is a harder line, because it certainly isn't.
I'd like to give Richard a chance to just have a final word on this.
My final word is just to say that, unfortunately, although I'm very grateful that Ricky Henderson would oppose TTIP, the Labour Party don't. Their position is not that different from the SNP, to be honest. At the moment, all we have is assurances of trickle-down prosperity, which is the same old excuses. Let's let the rich make their money, and somehow that will make everybody else okay. I don't see that that's enough to have a default position of acceptance. I think we owe it to the public, we owe it to people in general that... I think we owe it to people in general to fully oppose a trade deal until we have any reason not to. I don't see the logic of saying, well, we should probably oppose this until we have a reason not to, by which time it will be way too late. And the investor-state dispute settlement stuff, yeah, other governments complained about that. The UK government didn't. The other governments complained about that. It's been taken off the negotiating table until the final round of negotiations when the USA enters. It's meaningless. We're just been taken completely for a ride, and we have to stand up to it.
Thanks, Roy. We've got time for 3 or 4 more questions. I'm particularly keen to know if there are any women in the audience who would like to ask a question, because I'm conscious that they haven't had much chance yet. So.
Simple question. Is this a Westminster matter? Do MPs get to vote on it, or is it MPs? If it's not a Westminster issue, why are we worried about it?
It's Westminster.
Please explain.
It's Westminster. We've just had the answer. It's Westminster.
They decide.
It's the UK government as the member state.
Through the Commission?
Through the Parliament.
Right. So it doesn't make a difference what happens in Westminster.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification, everybody. Yes, this lady here. I'll come to you in a minute. Sorry.
Hello. This, I think, is a Westminster question. What are the policies that are going to be put forward for the mental health of Britain? Because at the moment, mental health has been for a very long time a low priority for the country and for the parties.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Mental health services have been the poor relation of the NHS for a number of years now, and I think the NHS, well, one could debate and argue about whether it's been protected either here or elsewhere. I think the evidence is that service for people with mental health issues has declined. The CAM service, I know, in Edinburgh for children with mental health problems have got a huge waiting list. I'm working, so I'm hesitating a little bit, just want to be careful that I don't name anyone, but I'm working with a family in Curry who started a campaign about the lack of services for children with autism and Asperger's, and it's, as you're probably aware, I think it's ended end of this week actually, is World Autism Awareness Week. So we're going to try and use that as a bit of an opportunity to promote that campaign. I'm not going to claim any party credit for saying that we'll do this and somebody else won't do it. I think we all have to accept that mental health services have been not ignored, but certainly haven't received the investment and the attention that they need to. And I think going forward, we all need to concentrate on investing in mental health services. It is a fact that people with mental health conditions, or mental health conditions in general, is increasing, so it's going to affect more of us. I think we'll probably all know people either in our families or within our workplaces who've suffered mental health issues, and if early treatment and diagnosis is provided, then people can tend to either cope or live with their condition in a way that ensures that they can live their lives as independently as possible. But if they have to wait a long time before they get that support, it makes the situation far worse and makes it more difficult to recover. So I back your call for investment, and I don't think it would be appropriate to make any party political points on it.
Thank you very much. Richard.
Yeah, I think mental health touches on everything. It's all levels of funding, whether it's Westminster spending decisions, and then down to the council tax freeze and the impact that subsequently gets felt by the public services, and in particular the service users. It is a crisis point at the moment, and it's not just for mental health. Mental health is obviously a top priority. But rape crisis, any other kind of service at the minute that relies on funding from any kind of central source, it's all being squeezed, and it's all going to get worse if we elect another pro-austerity party. And I'm afraid the SNP are going to have to change their position as well, because, like I say, at the minute we have austerity at every level, and it's not genuine to say you oppose it unless you really, really practice what you preach.
I'm not going to make any party political points about mental health. It is actually devolved to Scotland, and if I actually can make a pro-Labour point, under a previous Labour administration, Scotland passed the Mental Health Care and Treatment Scotland Act of 2003, which at the time was groundbreaking legislation and very much led the way in Europe for opening out mental health services and giving those with mental health issues more rights. It's a subject close to my heart because I've written a book about it. But the real issue is, what sort of investment do we put into mental health services? How do we make it better? For example, the example that Ricky talked about, people with children with autism and Asperger's syndrome. How do we prioritise the delivery of services? And the answer is by opposing the austerity agenda and prioritising funding for public services over spending on things such as Trident. So I'm very much in favour of prioritising spending in these areas.
Thank you very much. Was there a question here, Helen? Yes. There's a question here, please. Can you just wait for the mic?
Yeah, I just wondered if we could move to a different subject. We haven't heard anything really from the panel around immigration at all, and I'd like to hear a bit more about what your policies will be and what practical difference you might make for people living in this area in relation to that.
Who wants to go first?
Yeah. One of the points in my opening speech was about immigration, just to say that I am positive about it, because I think it does need to be said. And I wrote that speech before I heard that there was going to be a UKIP candidate in South West, which apparently there is. So yeah, I guess I'm going to have to make that point quite often now. Yeah, like I said at the beginning, it's not just about challenging the racism itself. It's about the kind of society that we can actually become if we stop being so parochial and inward looking and recognise the value that people coming to this country bring.
You're here.
I mean, I was going to give an anecdote, but I won't because it would be a bit cheap. It is just very important that we make sure that everybody in Scotland is made to feel a part of Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, I think immigration is a good thing for Scotland. It brings economic benefits as well as enriching the diversity of our society. Some research was published earlier this week. The Scottish Government crunched some census numbers, and they showed that nearly half of all new Scots, that's half of all people who've come to live in this country, have a university degree. Many of them have very significant skills compared with our own Indigenous population. We need people from other countries to come and live in Scotland because we need their economic muscle, but we also need them to make our country the diverse and rich society that it is. Modern Scotland wouldn't be the modern Scotland that it is without the immigrant communities that we already have, whether it be the Irish, the Italians, the Polish, the Pakistanis. They're all very much part of Scottish society, and my party welcomes people from other countries with open arms, and we're really not at all interested in the agenda that a UKIP candidate will put forward. But I say, bring it on, because I think any UKIP candidate will be sent packing by the voters of this constituency.
Thanks very much. I agree with Richard and Joanna, and look forward to joining them in debate with a UKIP candidate if that's what we get the opportunity to do. I completely agree with the points that are made. I think we're probably all immigrants to a certain extent, and we look at our own ancestry. There'll be a number of our ancestors have come from different countries to settle in Scotland. And indeed, Edinburgh as a city, I think, would not be the wonderful place that it is without the diverse communities that have landed on our shores over the decades and centuries. Maybe strike a couple of points, though, I think that's worth making, which is that one of the Labour policies going into this election will be that immigrants coming into the UK will have to have worked for 2 years before they'll be entitled to claim benefits. Now, I think that's reasonable. I think that's fair. That when immigrants come in and do, as colleagues have said, make a major contribution to our society and our economy, that's terrific. But to come here and claim benefits straight away and not contribute to society, then I think there's a mismatch there, and I think we need to make sure that our rules are fair. The other thing that I'm against is for foreign workers to be used to undermine the terms and conditions of existing workers in this country, and that has happened. And I think we do need a a rate for the job, for the want of a better expression, to ensure that the people who work in our industries across the whole of the UK don't find when somebody comes in from a different country and says, well, I'll do that job for a couple of pounds an hour less than you're doing it, and then start to displace people who are earning a living for themselves and their families. So with those caveats, I'm absolutely I'm happy to support my two colleagues.
Thank you very much. I've got time for two more questions. One here, and then this gentleman here.
I didn't need the microphone.
No, but the recording needs the microphone.
Listen, I heard earlier on you talked about the thing about austerity and all that. And you talked about the ability of the Scottish SNP to raise taxes, right? I brought my kids over to Halesland Park. I now live over in Longstone, and in that time that I brought them up, the SNP have been in power for I don't know how many years. You tell me. You say you're against austerity and you're proud of modern Scotland. In that time, I've seen the food banks coming about, and I've seen people, kids, young men and women leaving the school, can't read, can't write. And that's people in this constituency, in this area, in the area that I live in, and the area I lived in. You had the right to raise money, to go against these things, to get these things sorted out. You say you're against austerity. Why didn't you? Why don't you raise these powers? Why don't we tax people more and get rid of the terrible things that are happening to our young people now? And you're in power now.
The SNP are in power at Holyrood, but the economy is a matter that's reserved to Westminster. The economy is a matter that's reserved to Westminster. I and Richard and many others in this room fought the referendum to try and get a yes vote so that the economy could be controlled from Edinburgh, and then we could tackle the austerity agenda. I'm answering your question.
I think the question is specifically.
I'm going to answer the question if you just let me do so. The only tax power that the Scottish Parliament has is to raise income tax by 3 pence on the basic rate of taxation. Anyone who knows anything about economics knows that if you really want to change a country's policies on the economy, you have to have control over the whole basket of taxation. Simply increasing the basic rate by a very small amount would not enable the transformation that is required to tackle the austerity agenda. So you're absolutely right. There is a problem in this country. We do need to tackle austerity, but for the moment, the power to do that remains at Westminster. Please don't blame my party for that. We're doing our best to get it transferred to Edinburgh. But at the moment...
Much more austerity for Scotland.
Yes.
I mean, how can you...
Okay, let Joanna finish.
It's true, it's the government's own figures. Scottish government's own figures were published. And I mean, I don't know it all, but certainly what I've read and what I've heard, full fiscal autonomy for Scotland right now is going to mean max austerity that you've never known.
7 billion.
So how do you understand how that why should send an SNP member of Parliament to the House of Commons? I just don't get it.
That position is based on a certain premise, and it's not a premise which we accept. If we get full fiscal autonomy, we intend to transform the Scottish economy. The way that things are done at Westminster.
Let somebody finish?
There isn't only one way of doing things. You see, the difficulty is that the Labour Party, who are so keen to shout me down, support the Tory way of doing things. The Labour Party have bought into the post-Thatcherite neoliberal consensus, and they think there's only one way of doing things. For example, as I said earlier, the Shadow Chancellor was asked on television the other day if he would change anything about the Tory budget, and he said he wouldn't reverse a thing. That's your Shadow Chancellor.
Okay, thank you.
So, my party does have a policy to challenge austerity. You've all heard Nicola Sturgeon down in London speaking about it. She wants to increase departmental spending by 0.5% across the board, which would free up £180 billion to spend on public services. Labour don't like to hear that because Labour won't commit to it, because Labour are committed to the Tory party austerity agenda. They'll be round all the hustings in this constituency trying to shout me down.
If we want to know what the Labour Party thinks, I think the spokesperson for the Labour Party tonight is Ricky Henderson, and we will come to him in a minute if the people in the audience can let everybody else here speak, please.
Yeah. I've got a loud voice and I'll keep speaking and I'll make my point.
But quickly, because it's nearly past and I want everybody else to have 2 seconds on this and then we're going to finish.
Well, I think you've heard my point. The SNP has a policy to tackle austerity. We would reverse things in the Tory budget. We've set out a costed policy increasing public spending by 0.5% across the board to free up £180 billion. And you can still pay off the deficit at the same time. I know you don't like it, but it's there and it's our policy, and it's a policy that will win this election for us in Scotland.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to let Ricky come back, and then Richard, and then we're going to finish.
Okay, I'll be very quickly then, because I know that the football's ongoing. My understanding, and the austerity, we throw this around backwards and forwards. My understanding is that the Institute for Fiscal Studies has concluded on the budget proposals from the Conservatives and the Labour, the last budget proposals. Their conclusion is that Labour would be spending £47 billion more in the lifetime of the next Parliament. Of course, the books have to be balanced. We all have to pay our debts. We all have to make ends meet at the end of the day. But it's about how you do that and how you distribute the wealth in what is a very wealthy country. After all, the UK is still a wealthy country by comparison to many others. And it's where that wealth is concentrated that is the problem, not the fact that we don't have it. We need a progressive and redistributive programme to ensure that those people who need the support the most get the most support and are able to earn a living that they can make their own decisions for themselves and their families. In terms of in Scotland, whether or not we could make ends meet, the full fiscal autonomy issue is interesting. Again, I think there was an article in the paper today, a gentleman mentioned it there just now, and I've seen it now in several different sources. It says that if we have full fiscal autonomy in Scotland, then it means that we take ourselves out of the consequences of the Barnett formula, and there are things about £7.6 billion that you would have to deal with straight away. Now, except Joanna says, which doesn't accept the premise of the argument, and I dare say you would want to do something with your economy in those circumstances, but nonetheless, starting off with day one with a £7.6 billion black hole to fill, clearly would give you some challenges going forward.
Thank you very much. Richard, the last word to you.
Thank you very much. I can't believe it went right to the last question before we mentioned food banks, actually. I thought that was going to come up right at the beginning. In my day job, I work for Alison Johnston and Patrick Harvey in the Green MSP's office, and it's rewarding because it means that you're listening directly to people, whatever issue it is that they come in with, whether it's health, education or justice. You have to listen, you have to learn. But the first time that I remember writing to Alistair Darling on behalf of constituents was about the issue of food banks, and I think it was at Christmas time last year when we got to, was it something like 60,000 Scottish families got their Christmas dinner from food bank. So that obviously outraged a lot of people, not necessarily people in Westminster, but a lot of people down here. And the frustration and the reason that I'm here today is because not having a Green office, or a Scottish Green office anyway, I don't want to get into that difference between the English and Welsh Greens and the Scottish Greens. But the frustration of us not having an office in Westminster at the minute is we can't actually voice our opposition on issues like that in any meaningful way. We can just shout from the sidelines a lot of the time. And at a time when there's plenty of money to go around, and at a time when there's plenty of food to go around, seeing so much poverty and so much starvation down to the fact that our systems are broken is an extremely frustrating situation to be in, because it's all about political will to put things right. And things are not perfect. The Smith Commission was not anybody's ideal situation, but there are things that we have. Scotland already has the powers to do, and we have got some additional borrowing powers which we can use for capital investment. We can give people a pay rise now. We can close tax loopholes and make the wealthy individuals pay and companies pay a fair share. And whether that's on the Scottish level or the Westminster level, we need a consensus and we need consistency, and we need to end the scandal of poverty in Scotland.
Thank you all very much, candidates, and I'll do a proper vote thanks in a minute. But it falls to me to make a few announcements first, and my colleagues are busy waving things at me from all around the room to make sure that I don't forget any of them. So I'll go through what I think I've got to say, and if I've left it out, you can come in a minute. Firstly, I'd like to remind you that this meeting was organised by Radical Scotland, which some of you will know better as the Radical Independence Campaign Scotland. It's kind of AKA, if you like. Those of you, and we do work towards a radical agenda, or you can tell from the name. If you're interested in our broader agenda and in being part of that, our meetings, or coming along to find out what we're about, or joining, Pat here, wave, so everybody knows who you are, has a sign-up sheet. We meet every alternate Mondays at Augustine's United Church on George IV Bridge. Our next meeting is this coming Monday, the 30th of March. What we usually do is we have a speaker on a subject, and before we get on to the business, this time we've got a couple of speakers on the Scrap Trident campaign, and also for those of you who might be thinking about going along to Faslane on preparing for that, particularly if it's maybe the first time that some of you will have joined a blockade of that nature. Secondly, I have to say, if you would like to make a contribution to the cost of running tonight, and there's absolutely no obligation, Ian is standing at the back with a very capacious bucket. And thirdly, I have to say that I'm delighted. You know, our original incarnation was, and to a large extent remains, the Radical Independence Campaign. And a lot of the work that we did and other organisations did was about engaging people in the democratic process on both sides of the debate, I think. And the work that we're trying to do here in these question times is part of taking that agenda forward. And I'm absolutely delighted that both these candidates have all come along, and also that so many people have come along. And I do think it does show that there is more of an appetite for involvement in the sort of political debate than maybe there has been in the past. And we're organising some other events similar to this in other constituencies. So if you have friends or relatives who would like to come along, or if you've enjoyed it so much that you'd like to come again, our next one is next Wednesday, the 1st of April, in Edinburgh East at the Jack Cain Centre, and that will be at 7 o'clock. And we also have, and the reason we've put out the leaflets, which you've already seen, that advertise tonight's meeting on your chairs, is because there's a second meeting, which is a central one, which is a kind of all-comers catch-all meeting for anybody and everybody, which we'll do in the last week before or so before the general election, and that again will be at Augustine's United on the 27th. So again, please do tell people about it if you think it's been useful or helpful. Encourage people to come along to other events, and or to watch it on Democracy TV after tomorrow. Is there anything I've forgotten by way of notices?
Please, on the issue of immigration, please, can
I think we might be too late, but there will be an opportunity immediately we finish to chat to people. So if you would like to ask anybody a question, I'm really sorry, so I didn't know that you had a question to ask, but I think I've called a halt. I can't open it again because otherwise we'll be here all night. So it just remains to me to say thank you all very much for coming, and particularly give thanks to our three candidates for coming along and speaking.